Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Meet the Candidates. I'm your host, Jonathan Grabowski. It is fall 2022 election season, and here on us to talk about the newest 6th Plymouth District, the incumbent candidate running for the seat, Josh Cutler.
Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for
glad to be
coming
here.
on the show.
Glad to be back in Marshfield.
It is. It's really interesting. We now have two Plymouth districts in Marshfield,
Yep.
So 2 state rep races to cover, and so. You're somewhat of a familiar face because you were in the district kind of next door, and you're really good friends with our former rep, Jim Cantwell.
Yes.
But for those that don't know you, who is Josh Cutler?
Sure. Well, thank you. Number one, thanks for taking the time to do these kind of forums and showcase folks for the listeners. So yeah, I'm Josh Cutler. I've been the privilege of serving as a state representative for the 6th Plymouth District, which includes neighboring Pembroke, Duxbury, Hanson, and also a bit of Halifax. And I've been serving, this is my 5th term, really love the job. And yes, I have to give credit to my good friend Jim Cantwell, who was really, I think he was first elected in 2008.
Yep.
And that was really one of the inspirations for me wanting to get back into public services. I got involved in Jim's campaign and saw how he was able to be a force for good in the community, and that kind of inspired me. And so the next 2 years later, I ran for office myself. But delighted to be back in Marshfield. For those who don't know me, I'm a South Shore guy. I grew up in Duxbury, but don't hold that against me. I'm a former Marshfield resident myself. My dad started a business here when I was 1 year old, and I spent my summers here growing up. I have very good memories of Marshfield. Lived here for a long time, and briefly actually even attended Marshall High. And delighted to be back in this capacity to help serve, along with my colleagues Representative Kearney and Senator O'Connor, to help serve and advocate for the town. So I'm excited to be here.
So you were first elected back in November 2012. What made you decide to run?
Yeah, well, so I first got involved. I've been involved at a local level. I'd served on my Board of Selectmen and also on the planning board in my community, and so I really always enjoyed local public service. I kind of joke, my mom was a Democrat, my dad was a Republican, and they kind of both taught me lessons about public service and got me excited about it. We had a lot of dinner table conversations about politics, and again, Jim and I have been friends for a long time, and when he ran, I was very active in his campaign, and that got me really excited about maybe looking to serve at a statewide level, and I've really enjoyed the job. It's been a tremendous honor for these past 10 years almost to serve the residents of the 6th Plymouth District, and every 2 years I kind of stop and sort of take stock and think about, do I still enjoy the job, and am I effective? And I think I can answer yes to both of those questions, and so I'd be honored to earn another 2 years to be able to serve the 6th Plymouth District, now including part of Marshfield.
Part of Marshfield. So looking back at those past 10 years, what have been some of the accomplishments?
Oh boy, so that's a good question. I think, there's a couple things that come to mind immediately, and I probably would have some other answers if I had thought about it. But one thing that comes to mind that actually involves someone from here in Marshfield is working with residents on the PANS issue, which is, I know you've done a PAC.
We just worked on that together.
Marshfield TV has done a great job with that. Jennifer Vitelli, who's a Marshfield resident, really a dedicated parent and activist. And we worked really hard to change the law when it comes to insurance companies treating kids who are suffering from pandas and PANS. And it was a challenge. Anytime you're going up against insurance companies, the insurance lobby, it's not easy to change the laws. And we were successful, and we did it. We worked hard, and we worked with some great advocates who did a tremendous job, and I give them all the credit. But I was proud to be the lead sponsor of that bill, and I was proud to be the one that kind of pushed that over the edge. We got that bill passed, and now kids, families who used to have to make these terrible choices about whether they were going to pay skyrocketing costs for medical coverage for their kids who were suffering from pandas and PANS, and in some cases, there was treatment IVIG treatment that could help to cure them, and insurance companies were refusing to cover it. And so we changed the law, and we made it so that insurance companies now have to cover that. And so that's a real big change for a family in that situation. And so I'm really proud of the work that we did in a bipartisan way to kind of change that law and make life a little bit easier for families who are already in a difficult position. So that's one of the things I'm really proud of that we did last term. Just this year, we're continuing to watch as we implement that, because the work certainly continues. And there's one other thing, just if I can have two things.
Sure.
This past term, we've done a lot of work. I'm the chairman of the Labor and Workforce Development Committee, so we've done a lot of work in the area of workforce development. And we know there's a lot of challenges in our labor market right now. Everybody's looking for talent and for trained employees and trained workers. And so we need to get a little creative. But one of the things we've done, and I hope we can talk about this a little bit more in further depth, but one of the things we've done that I'm really proud of is we created a new tax credit this past session for employers to hire individuals with disabilities. We know that people with disabilities have many talents, but oftentimes don't have the access to employment at the same level that other folks do. And so trying to remove some of those barriers to employment, and oftentimes it can just be something as simple as a little misunderstanding or some reasonable accommodation, and you can have a really successful outcome. And so we wanted to make that a little bit easier for employers and for workers, and so we created a generous tax credit of up to $5,000 per employee for employers to hire someone with a disability. Something I had spearheaded, something I had shepherded through the legislature, and I'm really proud that Governor Baker signed it into law, and it's now in effect.
So we like to do this with people that have served for a couple of years. So looking back, what's something that you know now that you wish you knew back when you first got elected? So
I'll tell you a quick little funny story, and again, I hate to come back to Jim Campbell, but I remember my first term. So he had been there 2 terms, and I was a freshman rep. And I remember, I was very eager and wanting to do the right thing and learn and everything. And I was working up at the state. I was up at the state house almost every day in the beginning. It's one of the things you learn as you've been there a little bit longer, is to spend more of your time in the district. I think you learn more that way. But in the beginning, I was up there all the time. And I remember I was working late one day, and the physical building actually locks. Certain parts of the building lock at 5 o'clock, and there's a main entrance. And so I was down in the basement, and I was trying to get out. And I was locked in, and I couldn't find my way out. And so I called Jim. I said, Jim, don't ever tell anyone in this, but I can't figure out how to get out of the building. Can you help me? And he kind of laughed and said, of course. Oh, you got to go to the main entrance. There's 24 hours. And I said, okay, great. And you're not going to tell anyone this, right? Oh, of course not. Never. I'll never repeat it in my life. And of course, the next time we were at an event, he told that story and we had a good laugh about it. So I learned that very quickly. It's how to get out of the building, where the restrooms are, those kinds of things. I think, on a more serious note, though, you do learn a lot, and I do feel like I'm a more effective legislator now than I was probably back early on. And I think it's about relationship building. I think your currency at the State House is it's not money or special interest. It's your relationship. It's your respect that you earn from your colleagues, both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican. And I like to think that I've earned respect of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle from the hard work. I think that's really what it's all about. People respect hard work, and I work hard for my district and for my constituents, and I think I'm proud of the record that we've accomplished together.
Committee work, you mentioned, is a big part of the job. So
Yeah.
talk about some of the committees that you serve on.
So right now, I'm fortunate. I'm the chairman of the Labor and Workforce Development Committee. So in the past, when you're not the chair of a committee, you serve on multiple different committees. So you might serve on 4 or 5 different committees in one term. And I've had the privilege of serving on the Ways and Means Committee. I was the vice chair of the Children and Families Committee last term. I was also the vice chair of the Small Business Committee the term before that. But this term, I was proud to be named to be the chair of the committee, which comes with a lot of additional responsibility, additional time demands. And so because of that, typically you don't get assigned to other committees on top of that. So, but you do get commissions, and so that seems to be where I've made up the slack, and that the speaker appointed me to chair our Future of Work Commission, which is something that we've been doing the last 2 years, and then also our Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund Study Commission, which is an important issue and not quite as easy to roll off your tongue there.
Right.
But so I've been chairing those 2 commissions, and then we have a couple of caucuses that I'm involved with. And one is I'm privileged to be the House chairman of the Coastal Caucus, along with Senator Bruce Tarr, who's a Republican senator from the North Shore up in Gloucester. And so we work together, and we have different events related to coastal issues, which I think is obviously a pertinence to here in Marshfield.
Definitely. So let's get to today. So why are you seeking re-election?
Yeah, so I think we're at a time when this, I think an important time in our state's history, and I think I've had my experience and my background. I've been able to make a positive difference for my district, and I think really the next couple of years are going to be very important times. I mean, I think there's a lot of economic uncertainty, and I think my background, my relationships that I've built, and my experience will really be an asset to our district and to helping people in the community who need help. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what this job is all about, Jonathan. It's a helping people job. And that is where the most reward comes from, in my view, when you get that phone call after you've been able to help somebody and just, hey, thanks, Josh, you really saved us. And the kinds of cases that we work on change from time to time. In the last couple of years, it's been a lot of unemployment cases. We've had a lot of that, and as the chair of that committee, it's been particularly something that we've worked on. So, but mass health. Oftentimes working with our federal officials, Senator Markey's office and others. Passport issues the last couple of years have been pretty common. We just got one today. But that's really the most rewarding part of the job, is being able to help people. And I think we have a good staff, and I give a plug to one of my staff director, Cole Angley, who's a Marshfield High graduate, went through these doors. I believe, was he here for this building, or maybe it was the old building?
He might have been.
Okay.
He just made it.
He just made it. But I have a great staff, and we work really hard for our constituents, and I think I have a reputation for doing that, and I think that's, at the end of the day, what this job is really all about.
We always like to do a little Civics 101 here on the show.
Okay, it's not a test or pop quiz, is it?
It's not a test, it's not a pop quiz. But it's a question.
Okay.
So what's the role of a state representative?
What's the role of a state representative? Well, I would say there's a couple different parts of the role. One is obviously helping people.
Okay.
People have problems they need help with. Oftentimes, we're the first, sort of front line, and maybe we don't have the answer or the solution to their problem, but we'll know where to go. And that's really, I think, the most important thing is, just being that person that when someone reaches out for help, you're there to respond and to answer their questions and to help people. And that's, that can be someone sending you an email, someone showing up at the Marshfield Council on Aging for your office hours, someone stopping you at the supermarket, whatever the case may be. It's kind of a 24/7, and that's one of the nice parts about the job, is that people do need help, and being able to be in a position to help folks. So that's first and foremost, I think. Obviously, being an advocate, for Marshfield and for the rest of my district. When it comes to funding, trying to secure funds for our district, for our needs, for our schools, for the seniors, public safety. I've been pretty successful in doing that for my district, and in fact, I've only represented Marshfield for a short time. I've already been able to secure some funds to help for the Marshfield Chamber of Commerce to create a new trolley a pilot program for a summer trolley for local businesses. Also some funds for the dog park to help defray the costs on local taxpayers. Working on getting some funding for the Ventress Memorial Library. So trying to find ways to advocate for our towns, bring more money back, more local aid. That's the second part. The third part, I think, is just really being someone who, on a policy level, can help make positive change in the Commonwealth. Whatever the issue is. This term, we took an important step forward with a piece of legislation addressing mental health, which I think is something that is on all of our minds. And as someone who's a parent, I have 2 kids. You think about that a lot. With what we've gone through with the pandemic, and what especially with kids are going through. But frankly, everybody's a little bit fried. And so trying to address and talk about mental health more, and making sure we have access to mental health services. I think one of the maybe few good things about the pandemic was that it's kind of made it a little bit less taboo to talk about mental health. I think people are more comfortable about that, which is a good thing, I think. It's definitely a good thing. And so we passed a major bill this term in the session that I helped to write part of it. And it was the ABC bill, Access to Mental Health. And did a lot of important steps in terms of making access to mental health services easier. Created an online portal to help find beds and treatment in acute situations, making sure that insurance companies cover wellness checks. You're used to going to the doctor once a year for a physical, but the idea of going once a year to get a mental health checkup, something we don't always think about, but is just as important. And so that was a piece of legislation that I'm really proud of, that I worked on, and I helped to write a part of the bill that had to do with licensed mental health counselors. So that's something, just an example of how making a difference on a particular policy area, I think, is an important role of the job. So the 3 pieces: one is helping constituents, advocating for the town, and then being there to make a positive difference in terms of policy, whether it's mental health, climate issues, workforce development, in my case, you name it.
So you mentioned you had one parent that was a Democrat, one parent was a Republican.
Yeah.
Where do you sit on the political spectrum?
Well, so I'm obviously a Democrat,
Yes,
but I'm going to steal a line from Maura Healey and Kim Driscoll, our team running for governor and lieutenant governor. We had Kim Driscoll down at an event in Marshfield just recently, and she described herself as a get stuff done Democrat. And I like that phrase because I think it's about putting the label on getting stuff done rather than the partisan side of things. I don't, I'm proud to be a Democrat, but I'm not someone who believes that one party has all the
Right.
answers or that things should be ideologically based. I think people elect us to find solutions, and that's what this job should be about, and that's what I've made it about for the last 10 years. I think people who know me, and that's why I think I've earned a good bipartisan track record among my colleagues. So my dad isn't with us anymore, but I think he was the Republican side of things, but I think he'd be proud of what I've done.
That's good. So every race kind of has that hot button issue, whatever you want to call it. So what is it for the 6th Plymouth?
Every race? Well, honestly, Jonathan, in my campaigns, I tend to, I kind of just like to keep doing what I'm doing.
Okay.
And I know people, I welcome the challenge. It kind of keeps me on my toes. I've had opponents, I think, almost every time but one. I think the best way to keep your job is to do your job, and that's what I like to do. And I appreciate having opposition two-party system. It keeps us fresh and pushes us. But I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and talking about what I've been able to accomplish over the last 2 years. I'm really proud of that, and I'm going to stick to that.
So what's the biggest challenge facing the district? And it could be more of a statewide thing. And if reelected, how would you work to address it? Yeah,
well, I think the number one challenge that we're facing sort of from a statewide point of view and also locally, it just happens to be what I work on, workforce development issues. Our labor, what we call labor participation rate, for economists, the term that economists use, is shrinking. And we know that there are fewer people in the labor market and the labor pool than there were before. And part of that is sort of the after effects of COVID, no doubt about that. We've seen, especially among women, childcare access can be a significant concern, and it's obviously hard to re-enter the workforce if you're not able to find affordable, qualified childcare. So tackling that issue is paramount. But we're also looking at some demographic changes in our population that are going to be longer lasting. The sort of quote baby boom generation is aging out of the workforce. The folks, our generation, my parents, and those folks who served for so long. And so, I think that the pandemic has probably sped that process up in some cases. But it was going to happen anyway, and we saw labor participation issues even before the pandemic. So that's a long-term problem that we're going to have, is that we just have fewer workers. And so what do you do in that situation? Well, you have to do two things, I think. One is you have to focus on your incumbent workforce, your existing workers, and how can you, what we call upskill and reskill. Those are sort of fancy terms for making sure that our current workforce has the skills that they need to compete in the jobs that employers are seeking. And so focusing on that is one part of the equation. And the second part of the equation is really looking at where are there underrepresented pools of workers, people that we're not tapping into their full potential, their full abilities. And I think it comes back to what I said a minute ago about people who have disabilities. We know that the unemployment rates for people with disabilities is much, much higher than the regular population. And so if we can just work to remove some of those barriers and find those answers to allow people with disabilities to fully participate in the workforce, we're going to solve two birds with one stone. I think that's the right metaphor. Yeah. So, and there's other examples. Like on Friday, I'm going to visit a Massasoit Community College. They have a unique program. They work with the Plymouth County Sheriff's Office, a reentry program. Maybe you saw that, to teach when we say reentry, so these are people that have been in the House of Correction in a period, under incarceration and leaving there, and we want them to be successful, and so that teaches them diesel mechanic skills so that they can go get jobs in that field, which I'm told is can be a very lucrative field, and there's a dire need for people who have that training. And so they're doing these kind of reentry programs to teach those skills, so when people get out, they can walk into the job market and get a good paying job. And hey, that probably cuts down on recidivism rates as well.
Absolutely.
We know that. So it's one of those win-win things. So I think that's the second part of the equation, is we have to get a little bit more creative about thinking, like, where can we find more workers? And that's partly those kinds of things, and government can play a role, and the private sector can play a role too, and maybe rethink, we don't need a 4-year college degree for every, I'm one of those guilty, like I got a liberal arts degree from a 4-year college, and like, there's a lot of jobs that don't need that, and so I think we have to move away from thinking about that rigid kind of educational structure that we have, and more into credentialing and what are the skills that you have and bring to the job. So those are the two big picture changes we're made, and we're doing a lot of work. I think it's not just me who thinks that. There's a broad recognition that we need to do those things, and the House and the Senate, and the governor, this past term have invested a lot of money into our workforce training line items to try to do that. Commonwealth Corporation, which is the entity that we use to manage a lot of our workforce training dollars, has gotten record investments. And so, those are seeds that will be planted that will pay off as we train and retrain and upskill workers. But that's really the challenge, I think. This is a long answer to your question, but you've hit on kind of the thing that's probably the most important thing out there right now. And I do a lot of chamber meetings and stuff and talk to folks. And that's the number one issue I hear about. Is always just, I can't get enough workers,
Yeah.
And so
we might delve into it a little more depending on time.
Okay.
So just be ready.
All right.
But going off of that, so the district is large, it's diverse, it's multiple communities. How do you make sure all the needs of these communities are being heard and you're making sure you're meeting them?
Well, I think you got to be present in the communities. I think that's really it. You got to be there. You got to put in the time to get to know people in each of the communities. That's why I'm delighted to be sort of back in Marshall, because it's a community that I've really known for a lot of my whole life, really. And so it's delight that I'm able to come back and represent part of the community. But yeah, it's true. You got to be able to you got to be at the office hours and at the local senior center. You got to be at the ball field, at the soccer fields, at the different town offices and so forth, getting to know the players. And I'm fortunate to I already have a good relationship with many of those folks. But I've made a point. I've already started ever since I found out Marshall was going to be part of my district. I started hosting office hours at the wonderful, amazing Marshall Senior Center, which I have to say is just such a nice place. I could just move in there. It's wonderful, and they do a great job with all the programming. It's really a fantastic resource. Very pleased to see in another community I represent in Pembroke that voters just approved funds for a new community center, which will be a combination recreation center and senior center. So, getting to know folks that way is really, I made it a point to really get out, even though technically I don't represent Marshall until January 1st, but I've acted as if it's already happened and I'm working hard already for the town.
So we talked about some commissions, we talked about economic development. Talk about the Future Work Commission. I found that really interesting. Yeah,
so me too. In fact, I joke, I got assigned to chair two commissions by the speaker. One was the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund Study Commission, which in all candor was not the most fun commission to lead because it's a pretty challenging issue. And the other was the Future of Work Commission, which was a ton of fun to do because it was a fantastic issue. And so my co-chair, Eric Lesser, who was the senator from out in Western Mass, or near there at least. My geography gets a little bad once I get past Worcester. We had a lot of fun. We had a diverse 19-member commission, including people in the trades and labor, people in high tech, in the business world, people in higher ed field. And we had a series of meetings around the state. We went up to MIT, to the media labs. We went out to Chicopee. We went down to Plymouth. We were in Boston. We had some virtual meetings. And we heard from a whole variety of people, including, Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, former Governor Deval Patrick, including 17-year-old pre-apprenticeship training students in Brockton. So we had a really varied and diverse group of people that came before us. And, we learned a lot. I think it's, some of it we probably reinforced what we already knew, but it gets back to what we were just talking about, Jonathan, is that, this idea of our workforce and investing in our workforce. And that doesn't mean just, the sort of hard skills that we talk about, but, if you don't have childcare access or, if you don't have broadband access, if you live in some parts of the state, I mean, around here we probably don't even think about that so much. We have different options, but if you live in Western Mass in certain parts of the state, it's less reliable to have broadband service. And so if you're trying to, compete in the workforce, that's a challenge. Childcare access is a challenge. So those wraparound services, I think, is an issue that came up a lot. Transportation is a challenge, and that's something we definitely feel here on the South Shore. That's probably the one thing I would admit I don't love about the job is driving to it, because it's even now it's awful. So those are some of the things I think that I take away from that is investing in our workforce, but in a broad sense, and making sure we're looking at those wraparound services that are just as important a function.
Something interesting that when I was looking at things last year, I had around this time I had the opportunity to testify in front of the joint committees, and blockchain technology came up actually at the hearing right before us.
Okay.
So you're the co-founder and the co-chair of the House Blockchain Technology Caucus. So what got you into that, and why do you find it so interesting and important?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. It's something that is sort of developed the last few years as an interest of mine, as I've kind of watched. Everybody's familiar probably with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, and that's one application of blockchain. But I think blockchain technology has a much broader application. I think it's important to kind of look at the broader, step back and look at it. here in Massachusetts, we have such a natural environment to really be a leader in this space and have it be a huge successful driver of our economy, just like the life sciences are, or higher ed or healthcare. And we have MIT, we have Harvard, we have Worcester Polytech, we have all these academic institutions that are really at the leading edge of blockchain technology. We have some of the leading companies, the Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 1000 companies, and we have that entrepreneurial spirit, the small mom and pop, kind of entrepreneurs baking up stuff in their basement. And so we have all these great ingredients to be, a driving force in blockchain, the emerging blockchain technology workforce. And I think it's important that we don't lose those advantages and see those advantages to other states that are probably moving, in some cases, faster than us to embrace that. And so I saw this, and so a colleague of mine, Lipper Garabedian, who's up on the North Shore, and I both were talking about this one day. And so, we decided to get together and form this caucus and see if there was interest from other legislators on this. And it turns out there was, and it turns out, there's been a lot of interest.
Yeah.
So it's very new still. It's only been about a year. And we've had about 7 or 8 different caucus meetings. We've brought in different speakers. We had someone from the Boston Federal Reserve. We had someone come in from the Boston Blockchain Association. We had had a visit and served on a panel in Quincy for the Boston Blockchain Week. So it's been really interesting to me as someone who I think of myself as somewhat knowledgeable about tech stuff. But when I'm in the room with these guys and women, I'm not at all, because their knowledge is way, way above me. But I do think it's important that we as policymakers kind of look at this and try to embrace that and look at it, it's another potential, economic driver for our economy. And I think whenever we can do that, we should embrace that. And I think if you look back 10 years and probably even more like 20 years when we were looking at the life sciences industry, we made investments in that to try to nurture that, and look how those have paid off. I mean, we're on the map. So we're sort of at the nascent, very beginning stages of this, but I think it's important to do and to continue to push forward. So I think next term that'll be another thing that I'll be excited to work on and kind of try to build on and do more with.
So we're on the home stretch here, so we always like to end with some fun.
Okay.
Because
I've had fun the whole time.
I'm glad you are, but we're gonna have even more fun.
Okay.
So, what's a Josh Cutler fun fact?
A Josh Cutler fun fact. Well, I'll give you 2. One is I am sort of an amateur historian. I've written 2 books, and then one I'm a decent juggler.
Interesting.
When I say juggle, like literally. Juggle.
Yeah. In the movie about your life, who plays you?
Who plays me? So when I was younger, John Cusack. I used to get.
I love John.
I used to get John Cusack. But I think as my hair is grayed and his has stayed the same, I think that probably that resemblance has probably diminished. So I have to think. I'll probably stick with him just because he's safe choice.
See that.
But yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah.
If people want to find out more about you, where can they go?
Well, so they can start off just go to my website, joshcutler.com. That's my regular website. Then obviously we have the state website, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all those different social media. Or come to my office hours. I do every Friday. I rotate to a different senior center in my district: Marshfield, Pembroke, Hanson, Duxbury, Halifax. And the schedule's on my website. I encourage people to come in. You don't need an appointment. You just drop in and say hi. If you have something on your mind, or maybe you just want to say hi, that's fine too. Just reach out. Really, I think my message, and I think the message all my colleagues would share, is we really want to hear from our constituents. Even if it's something you may think we don't agree on, we want to hear. We want to know what our constituents are thinking. Right. And don't be shy. People. I enjoy when people reach out. So happy to hear from folks.
And last but certainly not least, why are you the best candidate for the position?
Well, I think my experience, track record shows that I've gotten the job done. And, I think, in this job, this is a results matter kind of job, and I think the results speak for themselves.
Great. Well, Josh, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And wish you the best of luck on the campaign trail.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And that's all the time we have for Meet the Candidates. And until next time, make it a great day.